Hello, it's John Heaton, and today I'm going to have another look at Bob Dylan's Saved album from 1980, because the review I did 5 years ago was, I did it in my music room, which is a little bit below ground level, so it's a bit dark in there, so it was a pretty dreadful video. And so in the same way I've redone the Slow Train Coming video, because that was recorded downtown in the street with all the traffic, which didn't work out either. So considering it's such an important album for me in Bob's catalogue, I've decided to redo the review. I'm pretty much staggered at the general negative reaction that this album gets from critics. It's pretty often ranked very close to the bottom of the entire catalogue, which I just can't comprehend. I think people have a problem with the message, and people get offended that Bob's trying to teach them the only way is this on the album. But I don't find this particular album very preachy. I think Slow Train Coming was more so, but even that was, on quite a few songs he was being very personal, and like I Believe in You and When He Returns, and not preachy at all. There's a couple where there's preachy lyrics, but on this album I could really only find one song, Are You Ready, where gets anywhere close to preaching. I think for the most part this album, Saved, released June the 23rd 1980, is quite devotional and just very personal songs about his faith at the time, and it's very evident how happy it had made him, because these songs are pretty joyous, which is not often the case, not always the case when you listen to a Bob Dylan album. You don't always come away with the feeling that he's fulfilled in any way, but this album is one of the occasions where I think he does. Whether he's revised his opinions since, I don't know, maybe he has to some extent, but I think the music stands up lyrically and musically. This album is the inner sleeve. I think it stands up. I put it in my top 10 recently, Dylan albums, and a lot of you were surprised or said I wouldn't do that myself. That's up to you. This is just my opinion. This cover was replaced on the new vinyl by a rather timid reproduction of the inner sleeve, which I disagree with. I think they should have stuck with the original. I don't think it's offensive. I mean, it's Tony Wright. I had correspondence with him a few years ago, and he told me that Bob literally instructed him what to draw for the sleeve, and then Tony Wright showed him the result. And Bob's only input was, can you put a bit more blood on the hands? So Tony Wright obliged, and then we had the final cover. I think it's pretty epic. The back cover's not so good, just a blurry picture of a concert, because he'd done all these songs. It came out in 1980, but he'd done all these songs in 1979 live on the November 79 tour, which was in California for the most part, I think San Francisco. And I think he had a 2-week residency at a venue in San Francisco, one of the theatres there. And apparently he not only played most of Slow Train Coming, he played most of this album, which was a good 8 months away from being released. So that was interesting, and he didn't play any of his old songs on that particular tour. He then toured again in 1980, early 1980, and some of that live material appeared on here. The Trouble No More live set, which is covering these tours, 1979, 1980, 81. I'm just trying to find out where the Saved tracks were recorded, when. We've certainly got Covenant Woman, November the 20th, 79, Solid Rock, 27th November 79, What Can I Do For You, same date, Saved, January the 12th, 1980, In the Garden, January the 27th, 1980, Saving Grace, November 6th, 79, Solid Rock, October the 3rd, 81, but there's an earlier version of Solid Rock, which is November 27th, 79, Pressing On, November the 6th, 79. So most of the tracks from Saved are on that bootleg series, and it's wonderful. And some commentators have spent a long time going on about the fact that the live versions are much better than the studio, and the production was ruined. In this book, Clinton Halen spends most of the chapter on Saved, arguing that it could have been better, so much better. Well, I've heard both, and I like both. And Jim Keltner even complained about his drum sound on the album. But I was listening to it just in preparation for this review, and I don't think it's too bad at all. Maybe it's been remastered or something. But Jim Keltner's quoting in Clinton Halen book, "I have problems with all the arrangements, or really lack of arrangements on Saved, but the most subtle and interesting case is that of solid rock. To my ears, there were a couple of nights in San Francisco in November '79 when Dylan and Tim Drummond and the band really found the heart and soul of solid rock. The audience thought so too. People who'd never heard the song before jumped to their feet to show their enthusiasm at the end of the song. As near as I can figure it, Dylan and cohorts saw that the song was a crowd pleaser and started playing it for excitement, and with the best of intentions therefore lost touch with what it was that made the song so exciting. What they did is they sped it up. In doing so, they dropped a note from that perfect bass line, so it wasn't perfect anymore, and Dylan allowed his approach to the vocal to change with the primary effect that the tension that ruled the song in such extraordinary fashion disappears, and instead it becomes another rave up." Well, always interesting to hear the musicians' views. By the way, great lineup. I mean, Slow Train Coming had been graced with some great musicians, Mark Knopfler and Pick Withers from Dire Straits, plus Tim Drummond on bass. Tim Drummond is also on here again, and he's replaced, Knopfler is replaced on guitar by Fred Tackett, who does a sterling job. Jim Keltner does the drum duties, taking over from Pick Withers, and we've also got Barry Beckett and Jerry Wexler producing, and we've got a couple of superb organists, Terry Young and Spooner Oldham, who do very atmospheric organ. I think probably there's better organ on this Saved album than any other Dylan album I can think of, and maybe it's because you associate organ with gospel music, but it's very much apparent. We've got a number of backing vocalists: Regina Harris, Clyde King, Mona Lisa Young. Carolyn Dennis, I thought, was on it, but she's not credited on the original album, but she was one of the backing vocalists around this period, and she married Bob Dylan, and they were married for a good 12 years before they split up in '92, I think. So good band. It's on the Columbia label. I picked up this copy in the shrink wrap in Hungary recently with the hype sticker, which I was very happy about. So, do I prefer this to Slow Train Coming? It really depends on my mood. It got to number 3 in the UK, rather disappointing number 24 in the US, and apparently there were some rather crass adverts at the time with the front cover saying "Bob Dylan will save you," so that was a bit provocative. Maybe that resulted in some of the negative reaction, because it was pretty much panned by the critics. Although latter-day reviews have been much more favourable, and I was very happy to see in this Ultimate Music Guide the review for Saved. The essay by Alan Jones is not very positive when you read it, but the rankings they've given to the songs are 4 stars for Satisfied Mind, Covenant Woman, Solid Rock, In the Garden, Saving Grace, Are You Ready? 3 stars for What Can I Do For You, and 5 stars for the title track Saved and Pressing On. So I thought that was pretty favourable. I mean, they're not always favourable on, for example, they slagged off Street Legal in there, which I had a problem with, but at least they got Saved right, in my opinion, and that gave it some latter-day praise, which has been lacking. The All Music Guide, I just read, they gave it 2 stars, and I think one review said even we find it a bit too much. Bob's preaching is a bit too much, even for believers. Well, I don't see why it should be. As I said, this album to me is not preaching very heavily at all. It's more a personal experience, and so I think a lot of garbage has been written about this album. By the way, this is another favourite Dylan book of mine, written by Wilfred Willers, the same guy who wrote the epic Twilight of the Gods book on the Beatles in 1973. This Darker Shade of Pale, backdrop to Bob Dylan, came out in 1984, and he has some interesting things to say about all of the albums, including this one. And he's the musical expert, so he'll take you through the chords and the major, minor chord progressions, and very entertainingly written, because he's not only a musical expert, he's pretty perceptive on the lyric front as well. So let's go through the tracks quickly. Satisfied Mind is the only track he didn't write. It was written by Red Hayes and Jack Rhodes. And it's very much trying to say, I don't really care too much for material things. I'll leave this whole world with a satisfied mind. I won't get hung up on fortune and fame. So quite heartfelt. Lindsey Buckingham covered this song on his 1981 album Law and Order. And originally this song, or not originally, but Joan Baez had recorded a version of this in '65, I think. So it's an interesting opener. He sings it pretty well, but it's a very short number. Then we've got the title track, co-written with Tim Drummond, the bass player. And this is very effervescent, very fast number, and well performed. And you can see a lot of these performances. I'm not sure, I think it's from the 1980 leg of the tour, where they were filmed. But I think on the YouTube, and not bad quality, not brilliant, camera work not brilliant, but particularly good one of this track I seem to remember, and Saving Grace and Pressing On, when he comes to the front without having started on the piano, and then comes to the front to finish the song on his own on the microphone. So then we've got Covenant Woman, which is quite a good ballad, distinguished mainly, I think, for the superb organ playing, which I assume is Spooner Oldham, but it could be Terry Young. What Can I Do For You is a similar track with very nice harmonica, nice organ playing, and very moving lyric, very personal. Solid rock is just what it says. It's a bit a hard rocker, and despite what Jim Keltner says, I think it's a great song on the album, and the live version's decent as well, but I couldn't distinguish too much of a difference. Maybe if you were there live in the theatre, it was more atmospheric. And then we got Pressing On, starting side 2, which was is a piano-based ballad where he's pressing on to the higher calling of my Lord, and with all the gospel singers, it's very rousing. And I remember James Fox on Desert Island Discs almost picked this as one of his choices, but gave the nod to I Believe in You from Slow Train Coming in the end as his Desert Island Disc from Bob, although then he also included Mr. Tambourine Man from the Byrds, their version. So Pressing On is great, particularly by the way, this is the sheet music. And one of the good things of having the sheet music is you get the words, which are not printed with the album. Most of them are not too difficult to ascertain, but the last verse, I'll just read it to you. Shake the dust off your feet, don't look back. Nothing now can hold you down, nothing that you lack. Temptation's not an easy thing. Adam given the devil rein. Because he sinned, I got no choice. It run in my vein. Well, I'm pressing on. So that was quite hard to decipher from the album, but interesting that he's basically saying, because Adam was the first man to sin, and every human being since, although Adam was metaphorical and probably not literally meant to be true in the Bible, you get the point. Basically, humans have always been sinners, and I thought that was an interesting lyric. In the Garden, Wilfred Mellors cites as the best track on this album because of the chord changes, frequent chord changes, and progressions. It's a very rousing song with some moving words, and I would beg to differ about whatever William Ruhlman said in his review about likely to be too much even for believers. Well, I don't necessarily share the conviction or the faith to the extent that Bob sings about it on this album, but I find these songs very moving, virtually without exception. And in particular, the next song, Saving Grace, is probably in my top 10 Bob Dylan ballads of all time. I think it's beautifully sung. Bob's playing so-called lead guitar, and you can see it on the YouTube version, backed up by some memorable organ and a really moving vocal. And it's my favourite track on the album, and it's very emotional, and nothing preachy about it in the least. And then Are You Ready? As I said, the closest he comes to being warning to people what will happen if they don't believe. Well, he's asking the question, are you ready? Are you ready for the judgment? Are you ready for that terrible swift sword? Are you ready for Armageddon? Are you ready for the day of the Lord? Are you ready? I hope you're ready. He doesn't actually say, I am ready, by the way. When destruction comes swiftly, there'll be no time to say fare thee well. Have you decided whether you want to be in heaven or in hell? Are you ready? So yeah, this is the closest it gets to being a little bit in your face stuff, but I still think it's a very moving song, R&B influenced song with great, listening to it just in preparation for this, and great harmonica playing, great organ, really good feel to this whole album. So as a mark out of 10, I'm going to give it a solid 8.5, if not 9, because I think it's a beautiful album, and I wish the critics would be a bit more even-handed, although, as I said, Ultimate Music Guide were complimentary, which I was thankful for. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.